Dust off those textbooks and sharpen your pencils because we're diving deep into the world of GIS education on this episode of Geographical Thinking. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of post secondary GIS education with our special guest, Jon Salter and Rahul Chandra. From deciphering database mysteries to unlocking spatial solutions, Jon and Rahul's insights will illuminate the crucial role of GIS education in navigating the complexities of our world. Welcome back to Geographical Thinking. I'm Michelle Brake, and I'll be your guide as we explore ideas, stories, and conversations through the lens of geography. Joining me today are Jon Salter and Rahul Chandra. Jon is the Esri Canada Director of Education and Research. His role is to promote GIS in both K-12 and higher education. The Education and Research Group provides support to customers, develops teaching resources, and delivers workshops and events to help teachers, professors, and instructors incorporate GIS in their classrooms. In higher education, Esri Canada also has programs to reorganize student excellence using GIS, including the scholarships program, the Esri Young Scholars for Canada Competition, and the Esri Canada Centers of Excellence program. As another part of the role within this department, the group actively partners on academic research projects using Esri software. Jon completed his PhD at UBC, where he worked as a researcher before joining Esri Canada. Rahul, on the other hand, is a technical lead with Esri Canada's technical support team. He focuses on enterprise geodatabases and related technologies and spends the most time assisting clients with issues related to enterprise database platforms, including SQL Server, Oracle, and PostgreSQL. Rahul has an undergraduate degree from the University of Toronto and a postgraduate certificate from Fleming College, where he also teaches courses on databases and programming. Thank you for joining me today, Jon and Rahul. Welcome to Geographical Thinking.
Yeah,
You.
thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
Awesome. How are your days going so far? I know it's a busy time in the education world as we round out the, I guess, winter semester.
Yeah. So at Fleming College, they just started the third semester. So it's a 10-month program at Fleming College. There's two 4-month semesters. So I typically teach in the second of those two semesters, which goes from January to April. And then May and June is when the students are working on their collaborative projects with external clients, all culminating in an open house showcase at the end of June. So at this point, I've kind of wrapped up my teaching responsibilities and I'm more just around if students have questions about their projects. And then I'm looking forward to going to the open house like I do every year just to see, the final projects and what everyone's come up with.
Yeah, and
Gotcha.
in the education and research group, we've just rounded out our two big competitions of the year, which is the Esri Young Scholar Competition and the Esri Canada Centers of Excellence Programs App Challenge. So those both wrapped up end of March into April. Of course, students are through exams, and we're heading into that part of the season where a lot of our work is focused on the academic research side of things because classes are out and students have a bit more time to contribute to research projects.
Gotcha. So not summer vacation yet by any means.
Never.
Awesome. Well, I guess to get us started, how have both of your careers intersected with the education side of GIS? I know we've briefly covered that in your intros, but in your own words.
I've had a little bit of a kind of an intersection, I would say, with every aspect of education and GIS. And what I mean by that is, so I did my undergraduate at the University of Toronto, the St. George campus. So I graduated in 2011 from there, and at the time, they didn't have a major in GIS. What you kind of did is you did a major in geography or any other discipline that you happened to be interested in, and then there was one professor, Dr. Don Boys, who taught pretty much all of the GIS courses. And if you took all of them, you could kind of cobble together this minor in geographic information systems that you could append to your degree. So I ended up doing that. I did my undergraduate thesis with Don Boys as my advisor, which was on, at the time, the Greenbelt legislation was just kind of coming to pass. It passed a few years earlier, so we were looking at just the spatial distribution of housing development and housing starts as a result of some of the work that had been done with the Greenbelt legislation. And so that really got me interested in GIS. But what I found upon graduating is that I didn't really have the job skills to actually get a job in the GIS industry. So I had two choices at that point. I could either have continued down the academic path and did, a master's and a PhD and maybe look to do something more along those lines. But Dr. Boys also mentioned to me this program at Fleming College, which was a 10-month graduate certificate. You kind of just go, it's super intensive, it teaches you job skills, and in a year you should be able to graduate and get a job out of that. So I ended up doing that program, graduating in 2012, and then I got hired as an associate GIS analyst at Esri Canada, which I would say was kind of my third level of education in GIS, right? Because that program is very much intended to be a developmental program to take what you've learned in the academic settings and combine them with a more accelerated pathway to getting on the job experience. So I did that program for 18 months. And soon after that, I got asked to teach courses at Fleming College as well as an instructor. So I've been teaching there, teaching two courses in database and programming ever since 2013. So in terms of my career and how it's intersected with education and GIS, it's kind of been almost at every level. And also both as a student and as an instructor.
Wow, that really is kind of a full circle moment covering all of the things that you could possibly touch within the sides of education. Now, Jon, I know you come at this from a slightly different angle, but still an education path. What does your career look like with the intersections in education and GIS?
Yeah, I've come to realize over the years that that my story in GIS, particularly my introduction to GIS, is a version of a very common story, which is that I was in an undergraduate program in forestry, and there was this course called Introduction to GIS, and I at the time had no idea what GIS was. So, but in taking that course, I can still actually remember the moment in a computer lab the first time I did a buffer analysis in ArcView 3.2, where it just clicked for me and I understood, oh, this is what this is for. And I could see the power of GIS as a way of representing and analyzing the world. So as you've alluded to, I took the other path, which was the academic path. And all through my academic journey, GIS has been a big part of the work. So in my master's degree, incorporated GIS and spatial modeling with 3D visualization to look at timber supply futures in forestry. And then veered a little bit going into my PhD and actually went into the urban environment and similarly, again, using GIS and spatial modeling, looking at energy and emission futures related to climate change. So looking at the impacts of different types of urban form on energy use and emissions. And it was actually through that work that I met my predecessor in this role, Brent Hall, who was Director of Education and Research before me. We were working on a natural science and engineering research council grant, and that led to me joining Esri Canada. And of course, in my role now, still very connected to the education market, both in K-12 and higher education. And I think a large part of the challenge for our group is to try to replicate my story, maybe, which is to put GIS in front of students and give them the opportunity to really recognize its power and want to pursue it as a career opportunity.
Yeah, Jon, it sounds like intersectionality has been a big part of that story, and it sounds like it's a big proponent of the work that you're doing moving forward with the department. I'm wondering, how do you see formal education, like degree programs and certificates, benefiting GIS professionals?
Yeah, so I think I will address that question by really trying to increase the scope of it, recognizing that GIS is a really big and growing tent. And that we need users of all different types, from those that just need to combine data layers into producing a map that they may use for communicating a plan or for taking into the field, to what you might consider true GIS professionals. Those are the people that need to manage and analyze complex data sets. And then in the work we do in academic research, we also see another type of user, which are those developers and spatial data scientists that are trying to extend GIS and actually increase the set of tools that we have for analyzing spatial information. And I think, fundamental to all of those roles is developing a spatial or a geographical approach to understanding the world. And to me, that's where the formal education really comes in. It's helping students connect those underlying spatial concepts to the tools that they're using, so that they're not just learning what tools to use, but really why they're using particular tools. And I think an analogy here is maybe useful is I've been using Adobe's suite of tools for my entire career, Photoshop and Illustrator, and I'm capable of getting to the point of the layouts that I'm looking for and trying to communicate information effectively that way. But I know that I lack that underlying theory and conceptual understanding of graphic design that would allow me to probably understand before I even start what tools I should be using and why I should be using them. And I think that's the same in GIS, is having that formal education so that you really understand the theories and the concepts and how they connect.
Yeah, and I come from a varied education background myself, with my having done my undergrad in geography, but then going on to the Center of Graphic Sciences, or COGS, to do a more technical program, and then I've completed a master's in sustainability, where GIS is the tool that got me the job, similar to Raul, but everything else kind of has been enhanced through some of that research. Raul, on your side of things, where it's a more technical program that you're currently involved in and have gone through, I'm wondering, how do you see that benefiting GIS professionals?
Yeah, well, just before I address that question, I was just having a bit of a chuckle at Jon mentioning that the first thing he did in GIS was a buffer. So that's also the first thing I did in GIS. It was in my second year GIS course at U of T, where we were making noise contours around an airport. So we did a multi-ring buffer. Um, I don't know what it is about the buffer tool, but it seems to get a lot of people into GIS. So I've heard that story as kind of a
Mhm.
common thing. You buffer something and then you're hooked for life. Um, but I don't know if that's just me, but um, yeah, and in terms of kind of the formal education side of it, I would agree with pretty much everything Jon just mentioned in terms of GIS is kind of a means to an end, right? And the end is this greater understanding of the world around us, right? And um, where the technical side of it comes in is that you know you still need to know how to execute the workflows in order to get you from point A to point B, right? So while it's true that having a map without an underlying story to the map is probably a pretty boring thing if there's not a larger context there, the methodologies and the buttons to push and the workflows to follow in order to generate the most effective map that you can generate that tells the story that you want it to tell, is still kind of an important series of skills to have, right? And I think that would be why, for example, when I graduated from U of T, I found it so difficult to find a job, right? Because I was up against people who knew how to do all of those things, and I knew how to do maybe a subset of those things. And so, even though I brought a whole bunch of other understanding from backgrounds in kind of geography and geoscience type courses that I took, I was still lacking in that area, right? And Fleming provided me this mechanism to go and fill in all of those gaps in less than a year and immediately get a job afterwards, right? And so, um, one of the nice things about GIS is it really does, like to your point, Michelle, intersect with everything else, right? And so that means there are multiple pathways that you can follow to get into this industry, whether they're academic or technical in nature, or some combination of the two, plus whatever background you might have outside of GIS that brought you to it in the first place, right? And I suspect for all of us, it's a hybrid of, to some degree, of all three of those things. Um, so in terms of how formal education is beneficial, um, it's beneficial because it has the means to provide you with all of those things, right? So if you do want to be more academic, you can follow that type of a path. If you do want to be more technical, you can follow that type of a path. One of the things that we're seeing as sort of an emerging pattern on the technical side of GIS is this emergence of end users versus administrators. So if you're an end user, there's the potential for you to be, someone who is a forester who uses GIS, right? Or someone who's an economist who uses GIS. Whereas if you're an administrator, now we're talking about someone who maybe delves a little bit more into the IT side of things, right? Where you're talking about implementing a product like ArcGIS Enterprise or Enterprise Geodatabases. And these are all entire careers in and of themselves within GIS, right? And so the more educational opportunities that are out there to help you establish yourself in any one of these different types of careers, I think the more successful the industry will be as a whole.
I think that's a great point when considering programs. It doesn't have to be a one or the other. Clearly, we've all gone through our experiences of it doesn't have to be one or the other. But I remember having talked to some students at one point that were going to COGS, and they were wondering, like, oh, well, you did an undergraduate degree and now you've come and done one of the programs there. Should you do one or the other? Should they then go on to do more education? And the way that I've seen it is if you want to do more, you can. It's not going away for the most part. Programs are around, but there is always going to be an option to continue to do something. If you've done a technical program and want to go on and do further academic research, you can. If you want to flip it the other way around, it's an option. And they complement each other. But I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on, are there any other differences, I guess, between the two? One seems to be more technical in nature, one a little more research focused. What should people be considering when going between the two of which one could be the right choice for them?
I mean, I think traditionally that has been the view, right? Is that university courses and programs that either are fully GIS or intersect with GIS tend to be more theoretical and academic in nature, and there's more of a focus on understanding the why of things. So, why is interpolation a valid statistical technique, right? Whereas a college program tends to be more about, we have these 7 skill areas of core competency of job skills, and that's the goal, right? Is to kind of teach those skills and prepare the graduates for being able to enter the job market. As with most things, there's going to be some level of blurring of those lines, right? So there are, for example, the GIS minor at U of T, right, was much more technically focused probably than a lot of other minors. There were still elements of courses where we did look at the term that used to be used was GI science. I don't know if that's still the correct term or not to describe it, right? But the science of GIS specifically, right? So all of these methodologies that we implement through the use of GIS technology, they all do have academic underpinnings in the literature, right? And so making sure that we have an understanding of that and why, in our day-to-day work, we might take a workflow for granted, but understanding things like, Tobler's law and all of these underpinnings to all of that is still important, right? Because, you need to be able to sort of rigorously and academically defend the conclusions that you reach, right? With a lot of this analysis and a lot of these outputs. And so I think traditionally that is how the two categories have been viewed. And I think for the most part, that's been my experience as well. But I definitely have had university professors that were much more um, interested in the technology, and I've had college professors who were much more academic, right? So I think it also kind of depends on the program and the implementation of the program to a certain degree. Another thing about college programs, because they do tend to be much shorter in terms of their time span, is they are also an entryway into GIS for people who are going through programs like Second Career and making a very quick and rapid change from one career to another, right? Whereas I think with to go through like a 4-year or a 3-year undergraduate program is probably asking a bit much, right, for somebody who has a family and kids and has to think about, getting employment fairly quickly, right, or even maintaining employment while you're a student in the program, right? So um, a lot of college programs, I know the program at Fleming, for example, also offer part-time programs, right, where you can continue employment and do the course in 2 years instead of 1 year. So those types of things.
Yeah, I think Rahul covered that extremely well. I guess other point maybe I would just add in the university programs is in a lot of cases you may have a few mandatory or elective courses. If you're really lucky, like Rahul, there is actually a minor in GIS, and that's not even that common. So in a lot of cases, it's enough to whet your appetite, but probably not enough for you to go out and have the job skills you need. The interesting thing in the university environment is most often, because it's only a set of courses or a minor, it's usually situated in some other domain, right? So it might be, how does GIS apply to forestry or oceanography? And I think that's very useful, from the standpoint of learning how to think critically with GIS, how to apply GIS. But ultimately, I think coming out of an undergraduate program, there really are those two routes. You could go to one of the postgraduate programs at a college and really learn the professional side of GIS, or you can explore it through a master's and a PhD and do a lot more self-study or more directed and a deeper look at certain aspects of it.
Yeah, and to kind of just add one more thing on top of that, a lot of college programs also have matriculation agreements with universities where you can do something like an undergraduate degree and an undergraduate or a postgraduate certificate. And instead of it taking you, 4 years for the degree and 1 year for the certificate, you can maybe do it in 4 years overall, right? For both credentials. And also matriculation agreements to go do complete master's degrees right after you've completed the postgraduate certificate. So I think in addition to kind of these are typically the two pathways that are available to you, all of these different agreements and the sort of health of the underlying educational institutions that are involved in the agreements also gives you the opportunity to change your mind several times about what you want to do. So, you can start off on kind of more of the technical focus and then decide that you're more interested in the academics. And if you have this strong relationship between all of the various educational institutions in the industry, it gives you the ability to do that in a much more flexible manner than you might otherwise be able to, right? So you really do need kind of everyone to be involved in this industry to make it as inclusive as possible.
I think parents across the country might be
Right.
cringing right now at the idea of their children changing their minds multiple times about what they
Yeah,
want.
mine certainly did. So can confirm.
And there does seem to be a kind of resurgence of people entering GIS as like a later secondary career option. I found, at least, like looking at programs that I've been a part of and attendance at some of them still beyond that, that it's a good mix of programs and people, age groups that are coming in to GIS programs, that it's not this is a right out of high school group. Okay, this is a fresh out of undergrad group. You do get a wide range, which is nice to see.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on focus or topic areas that people should be thinking about when choosing a program? We've established that there's a lot to cover, but are there any key skills or focus areas? Apparently buffers. We should all
Buffer
look
is
for
key.
buffers.
Yeah.
Early in your
Lab
career.
yeah. 1, course 1, got to do a buffer.
Yeah, I guess I can start this one off, and I'm sure Rahul can put some more meat on the bones. I think, again, it goes back to one of my earlier answers about that broadening the tent piece too, because I think, what people need in these courses is really dependent on the level of GIS user or professional or developer that they may want to be. But I think there are certainly core elements. Obviously, there's the real fundamentals, which is understanding vector and raster data types and coordinate systems and projections, all of that, really fundamental stuff. And within that idea of understanding the representation of space and these different data models is really important. Um, Rahul is going to be able to speak to this much better than I can, but obviously data management is a very key part of GIS. And of course, there's things like the relational data model, but increasingly we're seeing a lot of graph models and NoSQL approaches as well. One of my personal areas of focus that I think is particularly important is cartography and data visualization. And it comes to this idea that no matter how good your science is, if you can't communicate it well, it's not going to be very impactful. And so I think, those core elements that go back to the, foundations of map making are incredibly important. Data acquisition, obviously, I mean, remote sensing has traditionally been tied, but now we have the proliferation of Internet of Things, sensors and drones, and all of these different ways of acquiring data. So I think it's really important that people understand that aspect. And then, I think we get to some of the more advanced topics. From the standpoint of coding, I think it's possible to be good in GIS without coding, but I think it's incredibly beneficial. And I go back to the sci-fi writer Neil Stephenson, who has a really great little book that's called In the Beginning Was the Command Line. And his notion from that book is that as we've gotten further and further away from the computer with the abstraction of operating systems, that we understand less and less of how it works. And I think the same thing applies here is if you get into the code, you understand the analyses in a much more fundamental way. And I just think that's important to that higher level of GIS knowledge. And then coming from the academic research side, I think students definitely need some exposure to advanced topics. So, for example, in our group, we're doing a lot with geographic AI at this point in time. We also do a lot with 3D GIS and interaction mechanisms like augmented reality, virtual reality. So I think some exposure to those advanced topics so you know where the field is going is really key. And then my last point would be some form of independent study, I think, is really important as well. So that could be a capstone project, an undergraduate thesis, a co-op, an industry internship. That ability, in education, they call it transfer learning, the idea that you learn something much better when you have to take a set of skills and apply them to something else. I think that independent study is really crucial to people really getting a fundamental understanding of the tools and how they work.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with all of that. For their year-end collaborative project, Fleming defines 6 key areas of kind of literacy or GIS literacy, however you want to call it. Data acquisition and pre-processing of data is one of them. Web technology, programming, database, geographic visualization, and I am drawing a blank on the 5th one. Sixth one, spatial analysis. Sorry, is the 6th one. The most obvious one I drew a total blank on.
It's funny because I missed that one as well because I was going to say multiple levels of spatial analysis. I think like multiple
exactly.
courses.
Yeah.
It's funny that we both missed that.
And a collaborative project to be considered kind of a valid year-end project needs to fulfill at least 4 of those 6 requirements. And oftentimes it's the case that a project ends up fulfilling all 6 of those requirements, just because there are kind of interdependencies between the different competencies, right? So, for example, if you're conducting spatial analysis on data as part of your project, you've probably also done some data acquisition and pre-processing leading up to that point. So they're also interrelated, right? These 6 different core competencies. And I think if you were to look at other programs that do have, like Jon was alluding to, either a year-end or a collaborative or a capstone project, and I do agree that that's some form of independent study is a very important aspect of a formal GIS education, because it's the thing that gives you the opportunity to actually apply everything that you've learned in the program. I think you would probably see that most of them probably have a similar set of requirements that you need to fulfill in order for it to be considered a valid project. So we can kind of use that as a bit of a framework in terms of these are the things that your program should be teaching you at a high level in order to be successful in the industry. And then if you wanted to drill down a little bit further than that, it kind of goes back to there are so many different career paths that you can follow in GIS. And so we could break it down again using this idea of end users versus administrators. And then if you're an administrator, well, are you a software as a service administrator? Are you administering, your organization's own on-premise infrastructure? These are going to lead to kind of different sets of things that you might want out of a program, right? If you have that specific goal in mind, if you're someone that's coming at it more from the point of view of getting into more of a customization or a programming approach as an end user, then again, you're going to want courses in the program that reflect that goal that you have. And same thing if you're coming at it from more of a visualization perspective, right? Because visualization is something that unfortunately is not actually really in every program anymore. And I think it's one of the things that it's easy to just say, oh, just go into your experience builder and throw this template on there and you're good to go. But to John's point, right, there's a whole um, section of literature underpinning why we make the decisions that we do, right? So and there's so many great books out there, like How to Lie with Maps, I think is an excellent one that I would recommend everyone read, because probably very few people who are younger than I am have read that book because it's too easy to just throw the web map together and away you go. But there's, again, it goes back to understanding how do we know what we know about how all of this works, right? And so to a certain extent, the program that you want is going to need to reflect where you're looking to go in the industry, right? But these are all different aspects of it that it's worth taking a look at, whether those exist in the program or not. And most programs do offer open houses as well that you can go to and ask questions and sort of be an active participant in your own educational decisions, right? To see who offers what, and factor that into your thinking.
Yeah, and hearing kind of what we should be looking for in programs, there's a lot to cover that goes both into a college program that's more technical in nature or more academic program from a university. I'm wondering, with the announcement of some program closures at Fleming and possibly with Vancouver Island University, are there any gaps that you see in the education offerings in Canada?
So, I mean, for me, I will preface this by saying that I have a very kind of close personal connection with the program at Fleming, so that definitely biases my thinking on this topic, right, to a certain degree. But I would say that, I think the end of that program creates a big gap in education in GIS. The program, along with COGS, is one of the oldest ones in the country. In fact, it had just celebrated its 50th anniversary of the program existing last year. And in that time, it's graduated thousands of students that now work in key places in not just Canadian GIS, but also internationally, right? So there's Fleming graduates working at Esri in the United States. There's Fleming graduates working kind of all over the world at various other Esri distributors. There's Fleming graduates working for, kind of these big global international NGO organizations as well, right? So it's a program that has really been noteworthy during its entire existence for contributing skilled and quality graduates to various kind of levels of GIS in and around not just Canada but the world. So as someone who both was a student in the program and is now an instructor in the program, it's definitely a loss that I feel profoundly. When I heard the news, I would say it was kind of akin to kind of losing a family member. Basically, is hearing about this program being suspended. So I did definitely feel a profound sense of loss from that announcement. And then kind of stepping back and taking off the sort of Fleming glasses as much as I can and trying to look at it from the industry as a whole, I would actually make the argument that these cancellations are coming at a time when we actually need more GIS graduates, not less GIS graduates. These programs allow for the graduation of students that can immediately be hired into the industry to start fulfilling various job roles. We've already talked about kind of the matriculation agreements that happen between colleges and universities. And we have more than one person working at Esri Canada who went through the Trent Fleming program, where you can do in 4 years, the Trent University undergraduate degree, as well as the postgraduate certificate from Fleming College. So these types of things accelerate people's ability to get into the industry, right? Um, it's not the only way to get into the industry, but it is an important source of skilled labor in the industry. And so, not just the program at Fleming, but if you think about the larger context of the Vancouver Island University news, also, it wasn't too long ago that the program at Niagara College was canceled. Two of the three largest programs in Ontario are now gone, right? With Fleming and Niagara both having been canceled. Fleming also provided online delivery for the GIS program, which is kind of an important key fact going back to this idea of inclusiveness. It was a great option for people who couldn't uproot their lives and move somewhere because, as a COGS graduate, Michelle, some of these GIS institutions aren't necessarily in the most accessible places geographically. Ironically, since, we're
What do
teaching
you
spatial
mean?
literacy here and we put these colleges in the middle of nowhere in a lot of cases. But um,
You don't need to have a grocery store next to the school. It's fine.
so that online delivery was also a very important option to kind of welcome more people into the tent of GIS. And so that's now gone. A very important source of online GIS education is gone as a result of this cancellation. So, um, to me, that is all of those things factor together really, to me, make it feel like there is this big gap that the cancellation of these programs are leaving behind. But I would also say, hopefully, it represents an opportunity for other institutions, right, to notice that and kind of step into the fold as well.
I'd also like to say that Sean Morgan, the coordinator of the program, on many occasions has said to me that there are more people at Esri Canada who came through Fleming than any other school. So I think as a company, we feel this one pretty personally as well. One of the things I wanted to do here is maybe step back and put some context on this as well. Like, why is this happening? And from my looking at it, I don't think this is about GIS programs, about them not being viable or us not needing graduates. Really, when you look at it, you can broadly say that the provinces have had provincial freezes on domestic tuitions for many years now, which has put a lot of pressure on colleges and universities, and has really incentivized them to go out and look for the international students that they can charge higher tuitions to. And this year, with the federal government's cap on international students and the way that's distributed across the provinces, it's put a lot of pressure on these programs. So I think it's important to note that the two programs at Fleming that were canceled were among 27 other programs, so 29 in total that were canceled. And at Vancouver Island University, in addition to the two programs that were canceled, there were another 4 programs canceled. And if you look at the provincial funding situations, that kind of makes sense because Ontario is probably in the biggest challenge from the funding perspective. So I do think it's important to note that it's not about industry demand for these programs. We all know, we know internally from our own growth at Esri Canada, but also what we see with our customers, that we do need more highly qualified graduates, not fewer. So I think, as Rahul's kind of alluding to, this puts a lot of pressure on programs like BCIT in BC, because Vancouver Island University was the only other postgraduate college program, and it was really fledgling. It started in 2017. And on Algonquin in Ontario is really the only other program that's offering these kinds of services now. And we need a lot of graduates coming out of those programs to fill all of the roles that we see. So, I think as an industry partner, obviously we have to look to what we can do. I can say for Vancouver Island University, we were given essentially a day's notice to express our support for the program. And to my knowledge, nobody knew about Fleming's program cancellation, from the advisory committee to the instructors to the unions. Nobody knew about that. So there wasn't even an opportunity to do that. But we really have to do what we can to make sure that the value of these programs is well understood, and to see what we can do to provide maybe some more direct support for them. But yeah, I think this is really a critical situation, and something that we don't want to see continue with other programs.
And I think that's a great point, that we are so closely tied with the education sector, as it feeds directly into who we have coming into our organization. Um, there definitely seems to be a need for more, not less. I'm wondering, just to round us out, what advice would you give to someone considering a career in GIS, particularly in terms of education or professional development?
I think, as I was thinking about this question, to me the big thing that I would want to express to students is choice. It's the fact that a geographic approach is widely applicable. It's really hard to think of an industry or a government sector that is not in some way tied to geography, to spatial relationships. And so I think there's really incredible opportunities, and that can be traditional industries like I came through, like natural resource management, transportation, planning, things that have been using GIS for some time. But I think you can look at other fields where it's really expanding, like architecture, engineering, construction. AEC is one big area. It's increasingly being used in health and public safety. I think the list really goes on. So there's a lot of different opportunities for somebody with these skills to apply them in really important and interesting areas. And I think key to that obviously is developing that fundamental understanding of it, right? Understanding the theory and the concepts, understanding the tools, and once you've developed that fundamental understanding, I really think it's almost limitless the way you could apply these tools in many different areas.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I mean, at the end of the day, pretty much everything is spatial to one degree or another, right? And so that, to John's point, that's why you're now seeing, the emergence of things like indoor GIS, which has been around for a while, but is now kind of getting sort of more and more into these different specialized areas like architecture and engineering and those types of industries. We're starting to see, for example, just to kind of plug Esri technology for a second here, but um, advanced data sets like the utility network, right, which were more traditionally thought to be the purview of kind of external utilities for gas, water, and wastewater. We're now starting to see some of that type of technology making its way indoors as well, to start looking at, the electrical flow within a building and things along those lines, right? So whatever the frontier is, there's always going to be a way to continue to push it, right? Because at the end of the day, every problem has a spatial component. It's just a matter of whether or not that has been realized yet, right? In terms of the particular way that that industry thinks and approaches these types of problems. So there is definitely a lot of sad news recently with respect to education in GIS, but it's not kind of world-ending news. It's a serious problem that we need to kind of continue to put pressure on various authorities to sort of help us address. To John's point there, but there are still plenty of excellent educational institutions out there that are offering GIS education. And there's some areas like in Alberta, for example, where it's the exact opposite problem, right? They have so much demand for people to go through GIS education that you kind of a new program pops up every day, right? So it's funny. A couple of years ago, we had those ads in the TDC, which for people who aren't from Toronto, is the Toronto Public Transit Authority. But they were basically ads from some Alberta government organization where they were basically just encouraging people to move to Alberta, right? Because you can buy a house for $5 and all of these types of things. Well, I mean, they could basically redo those ads, but for GIS education now, right? Because they probably have like 10 GIS programs in Alberta for, every one that we now have in Ontario. So, there's definitely growth out there, and there's definitely kind of for organizations that are willing to make use of that opportunity, there are definitely opportunities to create GIS programs as well to address that demand, right? So definitely, like I said, be willing to visit open houses, ask questions, take a more direct involvement in your educational decisions about which GIS program, you go to, right? Because I think one of the things that was true traditionally is that, oh yeah, you could just go to COGS or Fleming or BCIT, and then that was the only level of thinking that you had to do about GIS, right? But now with the news of Fleming especially, right, this could happen to any program really, right? If it can happen to Fleming. So definitely be willing to take a more direct interest in your own educational decisions, ask questions, make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into before you make a final decision about where you go to your education. And to John's point, if you decide that none of these appeal to you, that's fine as well, because these programs are not the only way to get into the GIS industry, right? So there's professional groups like ERISA, there's the Esri Canada Young Professionals Network, just to name a couple. If you like your current job, there's ways that you can start to be a champion of GIS in your current role, in your current organization, if it's an organization that doesn't currently make use of GIS, right? And maybe professional networking is actually the way for you to get into GIS as opposed to formal education, and taking more of that kind of champion evangelist route as opposed to the educational route. So it really does depend on what you're hoping to get out of it, which pathway you eventually follow. And I think, despite all of the sad news that we've had recently, GIS remains a kind of robust, growing industry. I know I'm certainly busy from dawn to dusk in my role, so I could definitely use, a few more hires. So, definitely there's nothing to worry about in that aspect of it. You're getting into the right industry if this is the industry that you want to be in.
There's two pieces I'd like to pick up there. One is on the good news front. Well, I'm not at liberty to talk about who they are. We've been asked to support in the last year one new GI science minor and some changes to another program. So, to Rahul's point, there is certainly growth in different programs and people that are seeing this opportunity to offer new solutions, new courses and programs. So I think that's important to note. And then the other piece I would say on that is, because we get to work on the academic research side, which is always new and interesting. We've had projects in history, archaeology, urban design. So some of these areas that are maybe less traditional fields where clearly they're seeing the opportunity and the value of the tools and expanding into these different areas. So there's no shortage of interesting things to do, nor call for people with this skill set to do them.
Awesome. And I think that's a great place for us to leave the conversation for today on a message of hope for the industry moving forward. So thank you, Jon and Rahul, for joining me today. And as our GIS education adventure draws to a close, let's give them a round of applause for being our guides today. Your insights have added a splash of color to our map of knowledge. And to all of our listeners, remember to keep those pencils sharp and your curiosity alive as you continue your own GIS education odyssey. If you're looking for more information about the technical side of GIS, check out the Spatial Report podcast, where Mark and Maggie dive into the latest and greatest in the world of GIS. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep thinking geographically.